There we go. All right. Emily said she would be a second before joining. So I'm going to kick us off with a super simple growth topic that I got from Growth Day today. Growth Day is an application that I use to get daily motivational speeches and track my progress on personal habits, learn new habits, acquire new habits. And every day there's a daily fire, and today the daily fire was on affirming statements and the different affirming statements that we should have and be able to call upon to just bring energy and excitement and clarity into who we are and who we wish to be. So, looks like Emily's here. Nope. Looks like she's gone. Oh boy. She's probably figuring stuff out. But one of the main affirming statements that we can have is just what is our own purpose in life? Who do we wish to be? What do we wish to do? And why do we wish to do each of those things? Being able to call upon those and repeatedly use them and tell them to ourselves out loud is incredibly powerful. And I'll be completely honest, I don't do this often enough. So one of my things to do today is define my purpose in life. I know that I want to teach, and I want to be a teacher. I know that I want to use my knowledge to build cool things and to understand the world around me and to help others understand the world as well, so that people can be safer, so that people can act with more knowledge and understand what they're doing. So I need to clarify my purpose in life. But Emily is here, so we are going to begin with our interview. I guess, Emily, this might be an interview. I don't know if you would call it that.
I would consider it just, talking.
Our round table.
Yeah.
All right. It's time to begin our Kadena round table with Emily. Thank you so very much for joining us, Emily. I really appreciate it. I really appreciate you taking the time to hop in here with us and help us understand this. My past two Twitter spaces, Stuck in the Future has had many questions about nodes and how those actually worked, and the security and the steps involved in updating nodes and who has control over that. And so it's time for us as a community to understand this. I believe it is very important for us as a community as well to understand this. So as you're talking, as we're asking questions, I'm going to be taking as many notes as I can, so that I can turn around and push this up as documentation into one of the GitHub repos or wherever we would like, honestly.
Yeah, I'm not going to be as in-depth as somebody like Lars or Edmund, if you could find them, if you really want to dig into the very deep internals of the node and understand how consensus works at a very fine-grained technical perspective. But I can tell you how various parts work and various APIs that we expose that are available to users, and maybe get you set up with maybe a DevNet Docker image or something by the end of the roundtable here.
Awesome. Yeah, I appreciate that. I'm not sure if we need to get super in depth. I think from a community perspective, just having for example, the first question I have is like, how are nodes updated, and what is the steps that go through, that you guys go through at Kadena, or that the community goes through as a whole, to push out updates to all of the nodes.
Yeah, so this is actually it's a fairly simple answer to this question. We are proof of work, which means we do not push updates out to anyone's node. We do not modify anyone's node. We do not, make changes to their configs or anything other than we come up with binaries that we have validated through our sort of internal testing procedures, which range from, unit testing to a full range of integration tests that validate certain behaviors, all the way up through full mainnet replay. Before we push out binaries, and when we get those binaries, we basically say, hey guys, here's when we actually want so-and-so features to go in, at a particular block height. Here's the binary that allows for that new behavior to be unlocked at a certain block height. It's actually embedded in the code that says, at block height, 3.8 million or something, fork packed on and expose these particular features, but keep it, what it was until then. And then users adopt these things, and they can choose not to. But most of the time, I think, because we're bundling a lot of sort of new features up with various performance improvements and optimizations to the nodes, more often than not, people adopt the new binaries and they start running them, and we hit 51%, and eventually, if hashes change, then it sort of forces everyone else to adopt the similar binaries that have similar functionality, or at least produce the same hashes, and the network forks. It's not a hard fork. Just to make sure that we don't overload that term. There's things called soft forks. There are things called hard forks. We're not changing the history of the blockchain when we do this. We are changing methodologies used to produce hashes, and that's it. If you look in different blockchains like Ethereum, there are various mechanisms that are slightly more sophisticated that we're looking at in the future for doing this. For example, Ethereum has a thing called like gas bombing, where if they want to deprioritize certain features or deprecate anything, they just make them extremely costly for miners to mine, and they incentivize it that way, which gives an economic incentive to adopt the new whatever features they want to get in. But there is nothing stopping people in that scenario, in the same sense as our scenario, from putting in enough hash power to overcome such a gas bomb, so that they maintain the hashes and sort of feature set that their a particular node operator is happy with, for as long as possible, until it becomes too costly or to present something else. So.
Okay, so the gas bomb would be used to incentivize node operators to change their configuration, for example, to be perhaps more in line with, or just more secure, for example. So if you're trying to push out, like, let's say there's a function you'd like to deprecate, or a specific kind of configuration you would like to deprecate because of inherent, perhaps, security issues or risks, you can gas bomb those features?
Exactly. Okay. So in Ethereum, that's what they do in order to disincentivize, and it creates an economic disincentive to mine blocks which have those particular features. Maybe they're EVM bytecodes or different, featuring different contracts or something like that. I doubt the latter is actually true, but somebody could produce a modified binary that had, for instance, that disincentivizes using particular contracts, and creates an economic incentive so that miners will not want to mine those blocks because they're incredibly costly in terms of gas fees, or people will just not submit transactions with those features in them because they know that their blocks aren't going to be mined. Because if you think about it in terms of miners, yes, they might have, they might win a lot from something like a gas bomb, but if they were able to process multiple transactions within the time frame, and those transactions that were bombed were kind of too expensive and maybe didn't meet the sort of same fee threshold that they would get after, 5, other more expensive transactions, then there's no real incentive to really mine those particular transactions. In other networks, Kadena is working on this, but for example, something like Bitcoin, where there are more sort of robust mempool implementations, there are often minor incentives to do different kinds of things, and this is the way it is in sort of very mature systems where people have like replace by fee or child pays for parent type schemes that are more complicated and work to incentivize certain kinds of transactions going in versus others, and Ethereum is one of those networks, which I can get more into depth with. I'm sure we'll talk about the mempool at some point.
Yeah, likely. All right, so we've got Michael Williams, who has requested to speak, and Stuck in the Future, who has also requested to speak. I'm just going to add both of you.
Michael Williams, I don't think I'm going to be able to hear due to him being blocked. So
maybe we can try. I was just going to ask Sterling. I know. Thank you, Emily, for being here, and thank you, Sterling, for putting this on. This is MW Banos from Cadix. The question that I had was, most of the nodes historically had an auto self-destruct where essentially the binary, after a certain period of time, would no longer operate. It was essentially a way to force users to actually upgrade. And so unless you actually built the Cobble file yourself and modified the Haskell code to actually remove that sort of automatic turn off or self-destruct, you would be obligated to either upgrade or recompile and redeploy your nodes. Is that still in place, or is that finally been moved out?
That is not what we do anymore. We haven't been doing that for, I think, a year and a half, maybe 2 years. It used to be the thing. We used to call them kill switches. But you'll notice it was an easy way to force upgrades in the interest of people's, the health of people's nodes, until we got a healthy sort of network base where people understood how to operate their nodes and optimize nodes and sort of optimize their various network setups for the good of the community. But since then, there you go.
No, and that's great. I was going to say, I really will fully admit it was about you all make it very easy to follow the instructions to build your own nodes. So if you don't want to download the binary and you want to go in and build it, the setup process is a little arduous to begin with, but once you're set up, you can build from source pretty easily for your own chain web nodes. If you don't want to download the binary and don't want to put that trust in downloading a binary, it is pretty easy to build your own node.
Yeah. So we're open source for a reason, right? And that's, if you didn't like the kill switches, even back then, as sort of strange as a kill switch was, you could always modify the dates associated with when the kill switch would actually go in, or you could, remove them altogether and hope that your fork won. Yeah.
Hey Emily, thanks so much for joining us. Just for the community's sake, can we just take a step back? Maybe define the difference between like what mining is, what a node is, and the difference between like a Bitcoin node versus a Kadena node, and then how we're going to scale nodes kind of moving on to the future. So that's pretty much all that I want to know.
Yeah, sure. So a node in chain web speak is a collection of APIs in its broadest sense. It's the application execution layer, the mempool, the consensus layer, and the various gossip protocols that allow them to speak to other nodes. So when we say node, you have the ability to turn off various public-facing APIs, so things like the transaction execution layer, and just participate in consensus. You can expose your mempool if you wanted. You can, There's little bits like Rosetta integration, so eventually if Coinbase decides to list us, you'll be able to interact with Coinbase directly through the Rosetta implementation. And mining is something that you can also configure the node to accept. So miners, if you choose to accept mining on your node, allows miners to query your node for pending transactions and potentially assemble blocks themselves and then submit their blocks to the node to gossip around and be accepted by other nodes, hopefully. So node is a full node in the sense that it includes the mining API that allows miners to speak to it. But it is also a thin node in the sense that if you configure it that way, it will only contribute to consensus. But you can also contribute it or configure it so that it actually doesn't work with consensus, and you can sort of just submit transactions to it and have the pact interpreter run and spit out transactions and that kind of thing. So it's kind of a range of things, ranging from thin node to full node to development environment, depending on what you choose to expose.
Okay. Would this be also right now in the Kadena GitHub you have Chainweb node, you have Chainweb data, you have Chainweb
Yes.
streaming service, you have Chainweb miner. Would the node then essentially be the conglomeration of all of those repositories in one?
Yeah, so Chainweb data is different. What were the ones you listed again? You used Chainweb node, Chainweb data.
Yeah, you have Chainweb node, which I assume is your full node, right?
Yeah.
Then you have Chainweb data. Then you have Chainweb SSE, which is classified as the streaming, like the event streaming service.
Okay. So, sorry, I didn't even know that one existed, but I guess we split that out from Chainweb data. So there are various streaming APIs available in the Chainweb node for various kinds of metrics and data aggregation that you can use in order to monitor your node. So think of it like NodeMon. SSE is kind of like NodeMon for your Chainweb nodes, whereas Chainweb data is the data aggregation service that we provide people that sort of allows you to query the transaction database and various packed DBs and the cut DB for facts about what happened in certain transactions at particular block heights, and sort of build an off-chain history without having to query the nodes themselves. So you can think about like some things that go into transactions like logs tend to be hashed and not included in the blocks in their sort of full readable format. But Chainweb data allows you to query transactions and expose those logs and get a full sort of viewpoint of what happened in a particular transaction. So for instance, the Explorer is the thing that we back with Chainweb data. We're not backing it with a full node.
The hierarchy sort of goes Chainweb Explorer is at the very top, and then if you were to drill down, you'd have Chainweb data, and then below Chainweb data, you need Chainweb node. So what Chainweb data does essentially queries the Chainweb node, runs a set of transformations, stores that transformed normalized data in a Postgres database that's able to be rapidly queried and easily queried from systems like Chainweb Explorer without having massive delays from going through a blockchain and doing a lookup. There's a tremendous amount of transformations and normalization that's done on the underlying data before it's loaded into that Postgres database and Chainweb data.
Right. So there's lots of stuff you can do with this. And just to complete the question for stuck in the future, a Bitcoin node can range from full node to thin client, right? It depends on what you're doing, and it depends on where you're like who's providing your node. For instance, something like Bitcoin Core can be, I think they produce a node which is just consensus versus one that has sort of the full sort of like you can mine to it kind of suite. And Ethereum has things like thin Geth clients versus the full Geth node versus, what we've got where it's kind of all in one and you can just configure it for particular things. So it's kind of nice in the sense that we have only one node binary, and then you just have to figure out what to toggle. But we may consider releasing just a thin client version of the Chainweb node in the future, just for consensus.
That would make sense.
And Emily, you guys do maintain, you maintain a Docker image, and there's tremendous documentation around that as well. So if you're, too lazy to go and set up a sort of physical one, you can just load that Docker container and just deploy a Chainweb node in a matter of minutes.
Yeah, let me get a link to that actually. Where should I post this actually, Sterling?
If you want to throw it in the comments of the...
Yeah, that's right. There's comments and shit. But I have to join with my other... God, I fucking hate Twitter Spaces. I'm sorry.
That's all right.
Where do you even... the interface is so shitty on this thing.
Yeah, I'm still trying to figure out how they work. I know on the phone you have a little... like a chat icon bubble in the bottom right. You can tap on that.
It's only on the phone. It's only on your phone. That's why. Because, fucking Elon Musk, right?
Yeah. I'm not sure if you could place the blame on him as...
No, it happened beforehand. I think it was their previous CEO. Their previous CEO was just like, you know what? Fuck everyone who's listening on their desktop with a nice mic setup. We're going to make it just mobile. This is going to be great.
Yeah, yep. I felt that. The first time I was trying to hop on a Twitter space, I tried to join on my desktop because, I was, trying to take notes, or I can't remember why, but it wouldn't even let me join. So that was a little annoying. So ever since then, I've just used my phone.
Well, I have the link at least, and let me see. Maybe it's because the transport layer is a little bit more stable on the phones. We'll see. All right, there we go. All right, posted. So there's a DevNet link. Anyone who really wants to get up and running with their own node can actually just use the Docker container that we provide here. And then if you want to, for instance, get a miner set up or, toggle this so it talks to sort of mainnet, mainnet like APIs and various Bootstrap nodes and, peers. Just all you have to do is follow the instructions. We don't have anything more complicated than, set up your own NAT gateway, start mining to it and get Docker. That's it.
The only thing I would say about the if you use the Docker image, which is wonderful, and I do love the Docker image, make sure you externalize the actual underlying data. The reason being is if you ever have an issue and you need to delete the container and rebuild it, you want the actual blockchain data to be externalized from that actual container. Otherwise, you will have to spend a month rebuilding it or go and do an S3 download and pay for it again. So I learned that lesson the hard way when I first did this. Just follow there's specific instructions, and they're very well written on how to get the data and externalize it so it's not in the running container.
I can tell when you started working with Chainweb data by how long you think it's going to take to actually backfill. It used to be the case that it would take literal days for the mainnet blockchain to backfill history, but we've optimized it since then so that the full history can be fully backfilled within, I think, something like 6 hours at this point. So it'll take a big chunk of your day, but we've got it to the point where you can reproduce it within a day.
I did not realize that's a huge advantage, because before it took me like a week to backfill. So that's wonderful. I think it works.
Yeah. We spent a lot of time optimizing Chainweb data, and we've had a lot of people who are looking at it. We've got some people that are working on it full time now to see if we can make it something that can actually be used for various service infrastructure in a meaningful sense. So,
for somebody looking to deploy a node, what kind of system resources are kind of required, as with advanced and environment?
So Chainweb node is actually fairly small. I think it's something like 400 megabytes at most. As far as you'll need several gigabytes worth of disk space. I believe the minimum requirements are something like 4 gigabytes But I don't know if that can handle the entire blockchain at this point. That might be an expired number. I would say it's safe probably with
4 gigs of RAM, 250 gigs of disk space.
Yeah, something like that. Now we're working on various things to help limit that, so that'll even change in the next 3 to 6 months. Various kinds of like database compaction work that's going to cut down the disk size by a tenth, to 1/10 of what it's currently being used. But I would shoot for what MW said right now. You should be able to run it by the end of the year on a Raspberry Pi. That's basically what I'm saying.
Dang. That'll be nice.
Yeah. Just don't try using them to mine. I'm sure you'll not win anything.
Well, if you can use, I think it's the Stratum server is what enables it to mine, or to mine 2. What's the English word for that?
I think we have Stratum support. Yeah, you could do that.
Yeah.
I think, Kadena, you guys did publish a open source Stratum, if I recall correctly. I'll be honest, I haven't looked at it, but I think there was a Stratum that you all put out there for people that didn't want to go and make their own.
Yeah, I'm unsure of the status of it at this point, but I do remember us doing that. I haven't heard about it since, 2020. So I don't know, maybe people ran with it, but we should have one.
It says in the DevNet thing that you just sent that the Stratum server is yet experimental, and it can be enabled.
Yeah, documentation lies though, so I'll have to see.
Okay.
It looks like the mining client it looks like the Stratum server was added 2 years ago, and it looks like it's up to date. Yeah, so you can mine to ASICs through the Stratum server. So, we have a mining client that's just the mining client sitting around, which can support Stratum.
Emily, could you talk to the importance of decentralization and more nodes being spun up and just kind of advancement of the general network?
Oh boy, my favorite red pill topic. So decentralization is really cool as a concept. I like the idea of my network being hard against, both ownership by any one entity and also being robust against any sort of downtime, in the sense where any one node dies, it will not affect the health of the network, modulo, updating peer lists in the P2P layer. But, for a blockchain, it's necessary for, I think, network health. There's a lot of sort of woo science about whether or not decentralization actually factors into the sort of like health and longevity of a particular token, because I don't think that any blockchain is actually truly decentralized in a meaningful sense.
Can you define what you mean by decentralization?
Yeah, so decentralization, let's see. Hang on one second.
I think you just described it by saying you use the words hard against ownership and network health if nodes go down, which is effectively saying there is no individual owner. So it's difficult to get ownership of the network, and it is difficult.
I want to make that precise though. Like,
okay.
let's make that really precise. So decentralization is the the homogenization of control and decision-making responsibility across all nodes in the network, so that each node has, depending on its sort of weight in the network, can contribute a certain amount of decision-making potential to decisions that need to be made for the network. So in the case of something like a proof of work, consensus mechanism, the decisions that need to be made in a decentralized network must come from 51% of the hash power in the network. So 51% of contributors, and if we spread hash power homogeneously across the network, in this sort of fake scenario, every node, or 51% of nodes must contribute a decision in order to, or 51% of contributing nodes must contribute a decision in order to proceed forward.
And it's really important because if you don't have a strong decentralized node infrastructure, across multiple legal jurisdictions, across hopefully bare metal instances, not in cloud providers, a theoretical attack could take place where to make a decision on the network, you have to have 51% of the actual hash power on that network. And so if there is ever a node split or where nodes start to split off or lose capability or communications with one another, you could run down and essentially split the blockchain and actually make that 51% decision with a lot less hash power than you would need, because other nodes aren't online. Therefore, the miners can't actually put their mining power to the network. Therefore, the amount of hash power needed to reach that 51% might be significantly less. And so an adversary who targeted nodes when we didn't have a decentralized architecture could actually make decisions in the blockchain by shutting down nodes and applying hash power at the same time, which would be a scary thought.
Which is actually true of basically every proof of work chain in existence and proof of stake chain.
I agree, 100%.
It doesn't it doesn't take a lot of money to actually own a blockchain, but whether or not it's going to be lucrative is the question. I think you could 51% attack Bitcoin with like $1 million or something like that. It's not that bad, but you're only making one decision at a time. Yeah, there's actually a site which calculates, the sort of monetary expense or financial expense in order to actually own a particular system, and it's actually quite small. But whether or not you're going to have a significant impact is the question, because you have to sustain such long chains for a long period of time. So I think it's something like $1 million a block. So in any network, what you want is ideally a sort of homogeneous distribution of hash power across ideally as many nodes as there are participating in consensus. And here's where the red pill comes in. That's not the case in most proof of work networks. You often have these mining pools which contribute most of the hash power to a particular consensus mechanism, meaning that they are effectively miner centralized on the pools. So Bitcoin famously has 4 main mining pools, which contribute something like 90% of blocks to the network. And then sort of like individual bespoke miners who contribute nodes every now and then, blocks every now and then. And same with Ethereum, and same with a lot of sort of up and coming proof of work algorithms, things like Caspa, for example. There's sort of a paper out right now detailing a particular miner centralization attack, or incentives that incentivize miner centralization and pools, which is not a really good place to be in. So for the health of the network, you want to strive for a balance between distributing hash power across as many nodes as possible. And we try and do that by opening up the network as much as possible to sort of people getting involved. So you can set up your own node, you can set up your own mining client. You still have to put your skin in the game in terms of buying your own miners. You can come up with your own ASICs if you really wanted to, or you have that kind of funds lying around. But we also sort of try and incentivize people to with stipends. So if you're, for instance, mining to a renewable energy source, we have funds that we are willing to give you in terms of KDA or cash to get set up with a new mining pool or something in a green place. Yeah, so it's a complicated subject.
Quick definition on homogenization, because I don't know if a lot of people know that word. I personally had to look it up. I always have to look up straight, homogenization is one of the words I'm always looking up, but it just means uniform distribution.
Yeah, uniform distribution, hash power.
Yep.
So that's the idea. This is kind of where I'm I don't consider this I don't consider it as a feature of blockchains, not because it's not a feature of blockchains, but because it's not featured in any blockchains, if that makes sense, or meaningfully in any blockchains. It's a particular, to me, the main thing that you get from it is network health, and robustness in the face of potentially parts of the network going down over time, which is just good to have in general, I think. Lots of databases end up just being blockchains, for example. But I'm not under the impression that this is going to be how we overthrow the government, man. So it's important to think about it holistically.
I definitely think it is a way to separate yourself from them in a way.
Yeah. It's a great way of like establishing a potential new currency with an autonomous and decentralized sort of user base, but eventually you do have to extract that to fiat. We're building up infrastructure and all this sort of DeFi stuff around it, hoping that eventually it's going to catch on and people are going to be able to pay with these, new sort of extra gubernatorial monetary policies and currencies. But
That's super helpful. Thanks so much for explaining all of that.
Yeah. No worries.
Yes, thank you. This is I've taken lots of notes. Hopefully, I'm gonna try and turn this into like community-facing documentation instead of like a GitHub README, so that people can come and see and get a better understanding of how things are functioning for them.
That's going to be extremely helpful, and thank you for doing this.
Yeah.
We have one person who's constantly taking notes on the Chainweb node, and I'm sure you haven't seen this because my thesis has proven true for 4 years now, but we have a wiki on the GitHub for the Chainweb node. And the Chainweb node wiki actually details the entire block lifecycle, as well as the header binary encoding formats, as well as the various APIs that we expose. And literally nobody has been able to find this without somebody telling them. So if you want, you can go to kadena.io/chainweb-node/wiki, and you will see an incredible amount of information that Lars has actually put so much effort into. Just have no one ever see. It's really funny.
Can you say that link?
Yeah. Actually, let me actually grab it and I'll post it in here. But this is sort of the hidden treasure trove. It's not hidden. It's just that no one ever fucking uses the wiki. I don't know why.
Well, I just found it, and it says that most of the information that was previously on this wiki has either been moved over to our new Kadena docs site or the Chainweb node README.
I'm just going to call bullshit on that.
That sounds aspirational to me.
It is. It's not been moved. And the wiki's amazing. There's so much good information on there. Anything you want, if you really dig through it, you can find it on the wiki. Almost everything you need is there.
Yeah. Oh no. Did I reach my daily link limit? Oh no. I already said that. Oh, weird. I can't post the same thing twice. There's a detector. I guess it's a spam filter. Weird.
Okay, yeah, there is a lot of information here.
Yeah, there we go.
It's not a super readable format, and Google search does not bring this up.
There, I just replied to the. The wikis don't actually get cached by by Google for some reason. They just exist. I would encourage everyone to look at their favorite projects and see if they filled out a wiki. More often than not, you'll find some of the best information in there. But everyone's got a fucking blind spot for it. I have no clue why.
I'd say if it doesn't pop up in the Google, a lot of people aren't gonna end up here unless they're very determined.
Please, by all means, spread that link out as much as possible. You can do the same for Pact too. Pact actually has some pretty cool stuff in the wiki, including how to build Kadena projects with Nix, as well as the theory behind capabilities that Stuart and I wrote in extreme detail. Feel free.
All right.
Who went to the JS conference? Do you know anybody there?
I didn't actually end up going, but Randy and his team went, and they demoed this new app called, I think, Claim with a K, detailing some new work that they've done on Kadena.js. We're getting extremely close to people being able to interact with basically the entire packed language as a JavaScript API, so that nobody has to fuck with the underlying sort of contracts anymore. They can just build their own with JavaScript. And it's part of our divestment from, there's a longer conversation that we can have about our divestment from Haskell in the future as we go forward, and we sort of want more people to adopt and work on this stuff, including a movement of Chainweb Node and a rewrite in Rust, which may in fact be coming up soon.
That sounds awesome.
What was the foundation of that decision to move away from Haskell?
Haskell is fantastic for some things. It's really great for writing, if you know it extremely well. It's really good for getting started with very quick POCs. And it's very easy to handle sort of various concurrency operations, and you can do so in a way that allows you to sort of build out your data domain really quickly with minimal boilerplates, and get started with your sort of asynchronous like networking code very quickly. But as you begin to push it to its limits, the problems with the underlying language start to manifest. And one of those things is the fact that we have a pretty shit tier HTTP library, which is actually the basis for a lot of our problems with things like the P2P layer and the mempool layer. It's just, while the concurrency primitives are extremely easy to use, they're not extremely well optimized. And something like a purpose-fit networking language like Rust, you can write things like a P2P layer, and even if it's not the best implementation in the world, you can be guaranteed that it's going to run relatively quickly. Whereas in Haskell, as you push things, if you do not have extremely good optimization knowledge of the various ways in which the networking libraries interact with the transport layers, you're not going to get a good result. So what we're seeing is, we stood up a node with very sort of solid APIs, but as we're going to optimize them, some parts of it are very difficult to get right and are simply poor performing. But we've done POCs in various other languages for them, like the mempool and like the P2P layer, that have just been extremely fast comparatively, and make us sort of question whether or not we want to move towards a more service-oriented architecture, split out the APIs entirely, and allow you to stand up a packed node versus a mempool and consensus node versus the full thing, which is all of this stuff. I think we're edging more towards packed being the only real Haskell thing that we produce, while the rest of it will be in a better service-oriented language or networking-oriented language.
Yeah, it would make sense if there's that limitation. I mean, I would say that all of blockchain is founded upon, or I should say the decentralization of it, the functionality of it is all founded upon peer-to-peer and the gossiping protocol, effectively. So if that's slow, you're kind of shooting yourself in the foot.
Yeah, I mean, block time is as it is because we expect network propagation to take as long as it does. So for a really good epidemic algorithm, a good P2P layer, we expect network propagation to sort of reach peak saturation after a certain amount of time. This is exactly why blockchain had the sort of 10-minute block time, right? We hope that the network will be fully saturated by the various algorithms that we're choosing for the underlying P2P layer. And
the difficulty is adjusted to maintain that target block time of 10 minutes. Is that correct?
Yes. But for Chainweb, we're dealing with 30-second block times, and we haven't seen problems with saturation with our current algorithm, but it is suboptimal in the sense that you can see what happens with mempool, right? There are problems with mempool's gossip layer, which mean it gets gossiped around several times before the block is actually included in a particular block. So it may take upwards of something like 30 seconds to actually go in, which is really suboptimal, and it's a problem with the algorithm and a problem with our limitations in the language. And it's something that we're hiring for actually now. As our last sort of big hire on Chainweb Node is going to be the person who can sit there and optimize the mempool and P2P layers. Yeah, and that's also, it brings me to a sort of tangential point about folks that are sort of optimizing for block time in the blockchain space. You make a lot of assumptions about the size of your blocks and the sort of network saturation constants that you use as assumptions in your algorithm. So you'll see folks like Casper, for instance, claiming I think like a 5-second block time, exponentially 5-second block time, by making assumptions about how much they're actually gossiping around in terms of information, and also how fast and how quickly they expect messages to propagate and saturate their network. Right. So it's a pretty difficult question to really nail down.
Yeah, I mean, the moment you have a node or someone like that who's got a slow network, or let's say you have a large amount of hash rate in a pool that's connected to a node that has a slower network than the rest, that slows the entire thing down. The network propagation doesn't work, it breaks down.
Yeah.
What's the mechanism, Emily, that the network uses to evict a bad node or a node that's acting, outside of the parameters, be it with latency or the governance parameters of the blockchain? How is that managed?
Yeah, so built into the P2P layer is a reputation engine, which says, if your node either takes too long to respond, or the ping is too high, or perhaps it has a history of propagating nodes, blocks that are like constantly losing, I believe you get ranked a little bit lower in terms of priority. That's not to say that we incentivize miners who win, but rather if you're constantly wrong and you're also not really sort of re-gossiping other people's correct blocks, I believe that's the algorithm, which makes sense. It's not like a thing where you get censored. It's a thing where it's like if you only ever say wrong shit, then you get ranked lower. But that's the main mechanism we use to manage peers and peer choice. So, and then it's, I believe, like a very, very sparse Kadena implementation underneath the hood. So it's just a distributed hash table of peers. Yeah.
Sorry. One of the questions I had is it possible right now to, I guess you would potentially query a node to get a list of all, or get an operating list of all of the current nodes supporting the network?
Well, not all current nodes. You can access all peers that a particular node is aware of.
Right, yeah.
So there is a cut endpoint for this. The cut API is the various sort of blockchain consensus layer centric things, and peer nodes are included in there. I believe it's detailed in the cut API section of the Chainweb Node wiki. Yeah.
And Thanos, the other Thanos, not Cadix Thanos, has actually written essentially a module that goes through and recursively looks through every node. So it says, okay, what peers do you have? Looks at the next peers and it just webs out like a big spider web and actually gathers all nodes in the network. And he's got a data layer that you can query that. But essentially, if you wanted to know every node in the network, you'd have to recursively hit the cut API of every node and then hit the child nodes of that and follow it until you essentially have every node loop through, and you're essentially retracking over yourself at that point.
Oh, so he's got a network crawler. Nice.
Yes, he does. Yeah. I think it's still maintained. I mean, at least it was 2 years ago that did that. Essentially, it just crawls until there are no new nodes identified and everything is in the list. It's a really cool feature. I don't know if the other Thanos is on here right now, but
doesn't look like it. looking at the user list. So, yeah. I think Banteg was the first one to do a crawler like that. So one of our older users who was here from like the very beginning, I believe had something that was like a reputation engine that we ended up adopting and incorporating directly into the P2P layer as a result. So, when you guys do something really cool, we tend to listen. And it's actually helped us out quite a bit. So.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Let's see, I have a couple of other questions, and these are probably going to get a bit more dev related. But from my perspective, or just the question I have is, what plans do you guys have to unify the API for the chain web node so I don't have to send an individual transaction to each chain?
Oh man, we're hitting on my favorite topic, which is man, what are we going to do in the future about the user experience for multi-chain architectures? I've been trying to bang my head against this for a while, and I'm absolutely not sure what we're supposed to do. So basically, we have a few options here. Interacting with a single chain is necessary because we are sharded, so you need to choose your shard. However, whether or not you need to make the choice, or whether or not you can delegate that choice to something like a load balancer, is a question. And it's something that we've been mulling around for a long time. But we haven't gotten the user story correct, I think, for various primitive operations that you would need on top of that. So at face value, basically the idea is you would send your node into a packed API that has knowledge of load balancing, and it would sort of sit on top of your chain web node, and it would say, okay, here's the hash power on this chain, it's the lowest, so we're going to route you over to this chain. That's nice. That's fairly easy, right? That's an algorithm right there. Just look at the current hash power, a snapshot of the current hash power, and choose the chain with the lowest hash power, and then execute your transaction on that chain. And then you never have to worry about what chain you just sent it to, although you would have to sign away your rights to us changing the configuration for your transaction and regenerating it, because the hash cares about the transaction hash doesn't care about the chain ID. You would have to have us basically change your configuration so that you were on that chain, whatever you got load balanced to. So that's one concession that you have to make. But then what happens?
Maybe that's an optional flag, that you can choose as the person submitting to the block. Do you want best execution, or you want to force execute on a particular chain?
Yeah. I mean, I think that would be fairly reasonable. But then what happens? Because you still have to do various primitive operations in the network, things like transferring and checking your balance. And what's the story for that? Because currently, just to be extremely pessimistic, not pessimistic in the long run about the health of Kadena, but pessimistic about our current approach, is that you cannot consolidate funds without paying a price. And if for a multi-chain architecture that wants to encourage you to spread out your funds across multiple chains, that is wrong. And the incentives are totally backwards for, giving you the incentive to actually do that. So how do you consolidate funds? How do you talk with, say, MW's CADX on chain 1 when you're load balanced to chain 9? It doesn't actually make sense. And you pay an additional cost for interacting with that contract on that chain. Say that that's the only implementation. Now what? Now you're paying an extra premium, and why wouldn't you be incentivized just to deploy your funds directly on chain 1? And that's the problem that we're running into now, where we're kind of saying, pretty please deploy on every chain, make it easy for people who have funds on, that chain to, interact with your service and, not be forced to consolidate their funds and pay a premium on top of it. Rather than, finding a means of, collecting dust and consolidating funds and interacting with cross-chain primitives in a way that actually is pleasant and doesn't fuck with your day. So I'm actually unsure of how to do this or what this is going to look like in the future, but it's something we're looking at hard because we do recognize that, like, currently the architecture is, 10 optimal blockchains side by side. They're not really a cohesive network other than at the consensus layer. So we need to figure out what that story actually looks like. That'll be the big thrust for the next year and a half, 2 years. That's why we've got Randy's team and why he's got a team of like 10 developers now, because we really need to nail this down, I think, in order for us to succeed.
Yes, I agree. Honestly, one of the biggest issues that exists right now on Kadena is that the layer 1 can scale. You can add more chains. But the dApps that are built on top, they struggle. It's much more difficult for them to scale to the additional chains that might have been added. So it's not an auto scaling feature. There's no load balancing effectively for dApps that are currently built on Kadena, unless you do the hard work to find a way to make your dApp function on multiple chains without like needing to know what each of those chains are doing. A couple of ideas that I personally had was, well, one idea I got from someone asked ChatGPT about it actually, and he sent me the response. And ChatGPT said you could have chain 1 be able to read information from chain 9, for example. So it's not
right,
you can't
quick and dirty reads.
Yeah, you can't mutate information on chain 9, but you could in a transaction on chain 1, you could request and read information from chain 9. The current information.
Like a read-only replica in a database.
Yeah.
Yeah, was that Thanos who sent you that?
It wasn't Thanos.
Weird, because I was actually just talking with Thanos about this last week, that having a read-only oracle might be the way forward.
Yeah.
So that's not a bad idea, actually, which is really strange because ChatGPT is fucking terrible. I guess not.
It hurts your
But no. So to the point that, like, yes, we could scale consensus, no problem. But like after 20 chains, it starts to become untenable for the user. So in a sense, you have two different scaling problems here. You have user experience scaling along with consensus scaling, and the two need to form a nice cube and scale together.
Right.
But we haven't cracked that yet. So we're working on it.
Another thought that I had as well is, I'm not sure how you do this with blockchain. I believe it's possible, but the novel approach of new blockchains, like they're not even blockchains, so distributed ledgers like Sui and Radix, is that they fragment the state of your blockchain, and when you submit a transaction to the blockchain, they have an engine effectively that identifies the substate that will be affected by that transaction. And they lock that substate, and then they causally order transactions based on the locked substate.
Right.
So I'm not sure how you do this in blocks, but with the capabilities, I feel like it's possible to know the substate that's being affected in a Kadena transaction.
Yeah. So this is so when you're talking about Radix, you're talking about a consensus mechanism that is actually two consensus mechanisms. You have a proof of stake, a sharded proof of stake at the sort of base layer. And then in order to join shard data, there is a causal ordering that is established by another proof of stake mechanism with a particular like leader election protocol, which is detailed in their paper for Cerberus consensus protocol. So effectively a blockchain for their blockchain, but the second blockchain acts as an oracle for data that votes on whether or not your data is causally ordered. And in that sense, you establish a kind of partial order to your network, which, whatever. Okay, cool. That's actually not a bad idea. I question whether or not it should be proof of stake, just because, if somebody has sort of malicious intent and is voting on joining shard data that potentially benefits them, between two shards, and a sort of adversary is in the mix, then what's the incentive and affects their data? What's the ordering then? There is an incentive for people to benefit themselves and get their transactions in first. That's a separate issue, right? That's rational versus adversarial actors. But I think the approach is actually probably correct for what we need to do, is have an oracle between two chains or two shards, and check the sort of read-only state and ledger, and make sure that, and probably it would be something like a UTXO layer that can look at the sort of unspent outputs and sort of establish causality in that sense. But still in the early works, I have talked about this with Stuart a bit, because I think we do need something like this in order to speed up cross-chain transactions, because SPV really is just dead slow and not super satisfying to say that, it's going to take 3 minutes to complete your cross-chain transaction. Right? Yep. Good luck consolidating all of your funds.
Have you thought about like automating the completion of cross-chain transactions, i.e. given the fact that there is free gas allocated, have the different nodes out there look for uncompleted transactions and automatically apply it with the free gas transfer?
So we have thought about that, but that's a little bit strange in the sense that you are executing a transaction for a user when it could be the case that somebody wants to do some escrow type shit with their cross-chain transactions. Gotcha. And say, I need XYZ off-chain things to happen before I execute the next.
There's no verification, i.e. anyone can complete a cross-chain transaction for anyone else. There is no way to prevent someone else from completing your cross-chain transaction.
Is that the case? I thought you had to sign in order to actually complete that.
Well,
you just need the transaction ID.
No, it depends actually on the DEF pact. So let's say, for example, if you're purchasing, let's say that you're purchasing or storing something in an escrow, if the step on the next chain of the DEF pact requires a signature, or requires, let's say, like another transfer capability or some other capability, effectively a permission, a signature from your private key, it will fail. You would not be able to continue that transaction in that case.
That's what I thought.
What I'm referring to, I guess, is the ones that don't require that. I can just tell from sitting on Discord and Telegram how many times people come in and the instruction is go to the URL and put your transaction ID and click a button. And 90% of the time I used to do it for people because, I'm not talking about like the complicated ones. I'm talking about people transferring with their own, within their own account. Across chain, and they're told, go to the, the cross chain transfer webpage and complete the transfer.
Yeah, that's kind of bullshit. I think we would want to fix that.
Yeah, I think a better solution from my perspective personally would just be to create a tool for developers who are making these cross-chain transactions or transfers, because this could be true. They could be doing cross-chain transfers for NFTs, for tokens, for a combination of the two, and having a tool that would they'd say, here's my contract, here's my gas station. If you see any event, any cross-chain event from my contract, auto-finish it for my users.
Right.
So that's more of a dev tool, honestly.
Could. Yeah, that's off-chain privilege. Like that's a completion as an amenity, which the fact that somebody else can complete your DEF pact is a little bit fucky to me. I think we probably need to talk about this on a shorter time frame because that's just fucking weird, man. Sorry.
Emily, what's been your approach? I mean, because we have people like Sterling who have these great ideas, and I think there's been a tremendous shift, at least from some of the work you've been doing, to make it easier for the community and a more welcoming experience for the community to provide feedback back to the Kadena team and to really put the developer experience first rather than the layer one first. I think, obviously the layer ones become a very robust layer one. And now there's the point of, okay, well, how do we enable this layer one to be used? And it really comes down to, we need developers, we need DApps, we need people that want to contribute to the ecosystem. And it seems like, you've done a lot of work with trying to promote Stu and Doug and so forth to be able to get out there and start listening to people. But do you all have any plans to do focus groups to bring in some of the development all-stars like Sterling and pick their brain or bring in some other groups? Like, what would it take you to come develop on Kadena? I know you have the grant program, but if you could just talk a little bit more about your strategy long-term to really get the feedback and get a feedback loop going with the development community back into you all to make this a really symbiotic relationship.
Yeah. So I'm glad you actually brought that up, because this is our main thrust now, as you mentioned. Basically, what it comes down to is what we're realizing at Kadena is that we made a few mistakes when we launched. A lot of mistakes, but a few in particular relevant to this question. Namely, our documentation game was pretty terrible. This is a barrier to entry for people who cannot read source code. Our tutorial game was effectively non-existent. And aside from, inviting people to interact with issues and things, our social media game was actually rather terrible. We had some things going on, like, our marketing director at the time didn't believe in Twitter, that kind of thing, for the first 2 years of our life, which it's kind of held us back, I think, from communicating with everyone and set a precedent for how the community would go. So they sort of established this standard of, you come to us and we'll explain it to you because we're the kind of professors in the room, which was most definitely the wrong approach. What we're working on now is coming up with, so this is why we're focusing so much on JavaScript, for example, because the vast number of builders in the space tend to be people who interact with JavaScript, and we want them, building on and improving our APIs according to their own sort of use cases in a language that they're familiar with. We don't expect people to interact with Haskell most of the time. We are actively paying people, both Cash and Kadena, to build out our documentation and tutorial system. And we are thankfully now marketing directly to, I think, the community as a user base, trying to get them more involved in various day-to-day processes, such as interacting with the KIP process, which we've had a few people from the community interact with. So KittyCAD, for example, actually has been extremely helpful with her sort of polyfungible standard, which is still in discussion for Marmalade. And generally sort of being open and, accepting of feedback. And that's kind of what I think you were talking about there with getting like Stuart and Doug involved and stuff. Because, they're off running a business, and often it's easy to kind of withdraw and let marketing kind of interact with the community. But I think it really is missing out on a good opportunity where we can take feedback directly from our users, who are the end result of what the experience should be interacting with, right? So we want to really focus on building everything up in terms of tools so that you guys can get started, without having to interact with us so much. That's not to say we don't love interacting with you, but it should be a situation where we are not the sole arbiters of knowledge.
Yes, I agree with that wholeheartedly, honestly. I spoke with Tim Howell, who is the creator of Brew, the founder of Brew, who just kind of kickstarted it. And if you don't know what Homebrew is, it's a package manager for Linux and Mac OS. And I asked him, it's like, what did you do to make Homebrew so successful? And the first thing he said was, I built the ability to contribute to the tool into the tool itself. And that statement has stuck with me over the past 2 years as I've built my own things. If you want people to help you, if you want people to hop on board with you, you must make it incredibly easy for them to help, to see where they can provide value. And if you don't have those avenues set up and just kind of ready for them the moment they arrive, it gets really, like, there's a lot of confusion from like my experience as a developer. It's like trying to figure out how to contribute, find all the, like, where I can contribute to KIPs, or where I can talk about KIPs, or contribute in documentation. It's like I did my little things here and there, but there wasn't a clear avenue of here's where our current focuses are. And I believe that as Kadena brings more effort into those areas to build out those bridges between where they're currently at as the sole arbiters of information, as you said, Emily, into okay, now the community can also be arbiters of information and they can contribute, and there's clear pathways to do that, whether that be contributing code, adding more documentation, building tutorials. All of this will just really make the ecosystem flourish.
Yeah.
Another,
well, I hope so. I hope so. Just to comment on sort of like the state of things currently is I completely understand where everyone's coming from with, being a little sort of down and angry at the current leadership because, it does create a very toxic feedback loop where, we are the only ones who have the knowledge and you guys really want to work on stuff, but then you keep asking questions and people don't have enough energy to kind of disseminate the information fast enough and they burn out and withdraw. And then you guys are left without, dialogue with us. And then you get more frustrated and your questions become more pointed. And then we withdraw more. And now we are exactly where we are today. So instead of perpetuating that, we want to, establish this sort of healthy line of communication, both in the Discord and through sort of constant feedback and talking, and sort of load balance it across the team, and then also help you guys get started on your own. And that, I think, is how you build healthy communities. Right? So we just
the barrier to entry is so high to get into, Pact. And I think one thing that would be beneficial, at least from my perspective, is you have people out there like Sterling who, put a significant amount of time and effort to build a Pact training course that people can go and enroll in. And I think having more of independent evangelists that are not tied to the Kadena team directly in terms of the reward structure. If Kadena itself could endorse those kind of groups and someone like Sterling to go out there and produce videos and produce the hands-on, because I realize it's not sexy for the Kadena team to be out there hand-holding people and telling them, oh, here's how you write basic Pact. I mean, I would be hitting myself in the head too if I had to do that. But some people like Sterling can make it really easy and make people not feel like they're being judged for asking simple questions. And so I don't know what it would take to get some funding for community evangelists like Sterling or people that want to go out and put together high quality courses. And I mean, education, truly, if you have the right education in any system, you make that system far more likely to succeed. I think that we have a significant lack of education and access to education for the Kadena ecosystem, and specifically for Pact and a lot of the very technical implementations on the blockchain.
Agreed. And we do have a mechanism for people who want to get involved with maybe coming up with tutorials and that kind of thing. And it's through Kadena Eco. We do, as much as I've been getting messages, right, give people a rundown of what they're looking for. One of the things they are looking for is people to take on the documentation process and the tutorial process and producing various kinds of Pact-related content. So if you are interested in doing it, feel free to contact Kadena Eco. I can direct you. You can just send me a message, and I can point you in the right direction.
Who's the best POC to reach out to for Kadena Eco?
Probably Dan Wiggins or Francesco.
Yeah, I can.
Francesco Melipignano. I don't actually. Is it Melipignano or Melipano? I forget. He's Italian. I forget how to say Italian things.
Yeah, so I know that Kadena Eco has actually, they've been announcing the Kadena community grants. They actually just released a tweet. Oh, sorry, it was January 23rd. They pushed a tweet and it's their pinned tweet. Let me just, I'll copy it and paste it into the chat here. So if anybody is interested in that. I personally am working on the documentation for, I've been contracted out by Kadena Eco to work on the documentation for Kadena for 5 hours a week. So every week I'm just going to be crushing through as much documentation as I possibly can.
Hell yeah.
And
feel free to ask me any questions.
Will do. I mean, this was one of the reasons I wanted to talk with you is so I could start building documentation on Kadena nodes, honestly, because the community deserves to know how they work, at least at a higher level. And if people want to dive deeper, then you can just have layers that they can dive through. Discovering the wiki was a great boon. I will be looking through that, and most likely we'll have a link to that from whatever documentation I create from this call or from this space. But we've been going for an hour and 20 minutes now. I'm just gonna say
Sterling, can I just ask one more question really quickly? Because there's been one of the rumbling I hear in the community is that, and this is I personally have not had firsthand experiences because I don't do a lot of breaking changes in the blockchain, but there have been rumblings that the Kadena team makes changes to the chain web node, breaking changes, and there's not really a good communication ahead of time, and these things sort of sneak up, and all of a sudden there's changes being made. Is there any plans to sort of come up with a very structured way to introduce changes where there'll be an SLA in terms of, the Kadena team will notify the community, 90 days before, unless it's a major security change, in which case, we'll strive to, because I think in order for developers to have confidence developing on Kadena, they need to have some idea that there will be some consistency and a strong communications and governance structure for changes being made on which they rely.
Yes, I will second that.
Okay. This is actually really good time to talk about this. We recognize that the chain web node experience up until perhaps last release has been absolutely fucking awful for users.
Yes.
I think at some points we got a binary out within like 2 days of the service date, which is absolutely unacceptable, and it's something that we sort of brought up with the sort of leadership here and came up with a policy for modifying stuff. There's no specificity to the level of like, oh, there's going to be security updates and blah blah blah, so on and so forth. However, we are attempting to commit and converging on in the future releasing binaries to the public 1 month before the service date and releasing at a constant pace of every 3 months. So every quarter, a new node, and you get
I have a question.
Yeah?
I have a question. What about every 4 months? 3 months is a sort of satanic number because 3 plus 3 is 6. So what about 4 plus 4, which equals 8? Or maybe even 3.5 months, which is 7 months. Because 3 plus 3 months, that's 6 months. And that's a bit satanic.
That is the dumbest thing I have ever heard.
I don't...
I hope that was a joke, but I can't tell anymore. I appreciate you for contributing that to my life.
Yeah.
Also, you're not looking at me right now. I'm in fucking dark makeup and dolls kill shit.
That was not a joke. I'm 100% serious. I do not joke. I do not joke when it comes to the devil. And I do not joke when it comes to Daddy Long. And I do not joke when it comes to Michael. Don't laugh.
I love this.
6, 6, 6. What does that mean? Answer me that question, sir. Daddy Long. That equals the devil.
What number?
So you're doing 3 months, 3 months, 3 months, 3 months, 3 months, 3 months. Add all those together, that is 6, 6, 6, 6. You're satanic, you're evil, and you're probably a furry, to be honest. You probably joke. Joking is the method of pulling your penis to make it longer because you have a micro penis. You probably do that. Don't ask me why I know about that. Don't ask me why I know all the details about that. But you probably do.
I'm gonna kick him out.
No, keep him. What are you doing? He's entertaining.
No, that's not what I want.
Just don't give him speaker.
Yeah, you need to come. That needs to go to. There's a group called KDA Whale Pool that you can go in and talk about the serious topics like that. There's no trolling, but I do want to. If we can get back to the
No, join Kadena sisters.
This is a really important. This is a really important thing to talk about because I think it's driven a lot of developers away. And I don't know, Sterling, if you've heard similar rumblings from the people that you talk to, but I know I've heard rumblings about this for a period of time, and just having a strong DevNet or testnet available, and having nodes that are being updated on those, and just having a more rigorous change control and governance process, I think is really imperative.
Yeah. So this is a tough one. So
I can speak to this already. Like I've been affected by node updates. I got crushed by node updates. There was the node update that removed the errors, for example. It's like a lot of people were using a D app I was developing at the time, and they kept on sending me errors, and it was just blank, and I was like, this is unhelpful.
Yeah, so that was really dumb on our part. I think we should have waited until we got the local stuff out.
Yeah, but I had 24 hours respawn. Like I had 24 hours to know what was changing in the node update, and then it just went live, and I was like, oof.
Yeah.
At the same time, Xwallet also updated their wallet to remove an API endpoint that they had, and that hurt because that broke some other stuff.
So I can't speak for Xwallet because we are not affiliated with Cadex in extremely large neon letters.
Fake Dex, whichever you say.
Or fake Dex, whichever one lost the lawsuit, right? I am, or is going to lose the lawsuit. So we don't have good governance surrounding changes to the node at this point, mostly because, I guess in the case of the errors we expected to be spat out by local, but then later, I think, as we were releasing it, realized, oh wait, shit, like the error messages aren't good out of local because it's not a true simulation of what goes onto the blockchain. So you're not even getting like a true view of what will and will not succeed. But also because there were exploits in the wild that we got via bug bounty using the error messages for various kinds of shenanigans. And we wanted to get those cleaned up as soon as possible. So it was kind of a rushed operation to just cut that shit out until we could come up with better pre-flight simulation, and then also come up with an error code system, which will be implemented, I think, in the next node. So we will be bringing error messages back into Send, but in a truncated format that will allow you to query them via chain web data as opposed to storing them on chain. And these are things that you don't really want to say because, you say, oh man, we're liable for exploits, shut that shit down. That's egg on our face, I think. I think we need to have, this is part of why the dialogue breakdown is so important to me, because, had we a good dialogue with you guys, we could have said this, I think, in fewer and, better structured words. But we didn't, so we just did the thing. And the knock-on effect of not being able to talk with you guys has reflected in a lot of different things. So, we don't, we weren't considering your guys' feedback in the sort of release process. So it was pretty harrowing as a release process goes. But we've since we're attempting to change that and turn that around. So eventually what I hope we get to, so we've got our sort of 1 month stability period where, people poke at the nodes and give us feedback and that kind of thing. And we do testing and sort of solidify them, but the feature set is, concrete at that point. As we do things in the future, I hope we move towards a governance model where we pose things in terms of KIPs and you guys interact with the KIPs and make your voices known regarding certain subjects, like what's supposed to go into, command validation for the simulations and that kind of thing. We'll get there, but I think baby steps. We're committing to, a reasonable interval for release and a reasonable timeline for people to test things that allows them to move in a more agile sense. And then hopefully getting you guys back error messages in the future. So yeah, I think as we talk, just continue that line of questioning and pitch that to Stuart and pitch that to Will and Doug, and make it known that this is a pain point, and we'll react. So.
Yes, thank you.
Well, I think people have been seeing this job advert that had gone around saying that Kadena encourages people to take long holidays and vacations, and I think people were seeing that and seeing Chain Web releases 2 days before, and it's like, well, that's sort of a quick divergence. Like, people are on holiday, but you guys are going to make us run around and fix things while the company's encouraging holidays. So I think that's where a lot of the resentment sort of came from.
God, I wish that were true. We say that we're going to have flexible vacation and shit, and yet I have to browbeat people to take more than a week of vacation a year. It's like, no wonder everyone's burning out. It's pretty fucking terrible. No, the reality is there have been 2 people who have taken a little bit of a step back. One is Doug, because he had some personal tragedies in his life, and he's I think been on vacation for he was on vacation for 2 months, and it was very impromptu. He was the stuff happened, and then we had to give him some time off. And I think we all said, okay, Doug has done enough for the company that we're willing to tolerate something like a 2-ish month sabbatical. He's back now. And he probably will not be taking a vacation again this year, so just keep that in mind. But with Will, I think there was similar kinds of burnout. He moved to Sweden, completely moved, and then COVID hit, and he just kind of lost his. He also had some personal tragedies that kind of fucked his day up. So he's slowly coming back as well. But the rest of us have been fairly interactive with, I think, the rest of you. And I'm slowly trying to stoke people back into the mood of, getting back up to full speed. So, you'll hear me talk about oh yeah, I felt it burnt out last year and I took a vacation. And the reality is I took maybe 3 weeks of vacation last year, which is less than, what was allowed, and also never around a release, just so I could be available. But that's not good, right? If anyone is taking time off from a release and it's affecting people's ability to function, that's a failure of the business. I don't behoove anybody taking vacation and then getting punished for it. So if we cannot support people and they're not allowed to take vacation as a result, then I think we will have failed as a corporate structure. But so far, I don't think that's the case. I think we had a few very special cases. But I hope you guys...
It's important, that as long as there's a way to get it done, because what I don't want to have happen is have Daddy Long, have all the students calling him, and then he can't get his work done, and, it goes sour pretty quickly.
Yeah. So I think the impression is that, this is... it's not like anyone is taking a ton of time off, or anyone's taking even months off at a time. It's work-life balance allows you to amortize your productivity at a higher rate of productivity for a longer period of time, at the concession of taking continual breaks every now and then, right? So you don't want to think about it in terms of just for everyone, because I don't know how, up to date everyone is on sort of working theory, but it's often the case that when you study long-term sort of productivity output in individual workers, that productivity spikes don't work. You kind of top out at around 40 good hours a week, and every other sort of hour you put into your week is amortized over your entire work cycle up until your vacation at a certain point in time. So you think about somebody putting in 50 hours of work a week, 10 hours of those are not spent properly, or that person is working less hard in order to spread that work out over a longer period of time. So you do want to make sure that people are not spending all of their time on a particular task simply because it's useless. And you also want to encourage them to go on vacation because their productivity is amortized over smaller periods of intense output as opposed to less quality output over a longer period of time. Impressions don't matter. Output matters. And, taking a vacation is as necessary as, working hard. Right? So that's the full sort of theory that I'm working on. And then blow up for 2 months, where he could have been just putting in 40-hour weeks and then blowing up, for like a few weeks. So impressions matter here. I think it would be better for him to take more frequent breaks and that kind of thing.
Yeah. So I mean, I personally can speak to burnout and burnout culture that I feel just kind of exists and is prevalent in a lot of different places. Uh, I do feel, honestly, I have felt as I've interacted with the Kadena team that you guys work far too much on things,
Yes.
and so you're not as productive as you could be. And you speak like when you say that taking breaks is incredibly effective, and the research that backs that, it's true. It's 100% true. You can't work 60 hours every single week and expect to continuously be productive for all of those 60 hours. It simply doesn't work. So
Yeah.
yes, I agree with that wholeheartedly. I am totally fine with taking breaks. One of the reasons you have lots of people in a company is so that people can go on vacation and it doesn't completely obliterate a release cycle. If a release is wholly dependent on you to make it happen, continuously, like every 3 months, you must be physically present, then you're doing something wrong,
Not 3
I would
months,
say.
4 months, 4 months, 4 months.
I'm sorry, 3.5 months. 3.5 months.
Satanic
Yeah.
meltdown in here.
Yeah.
Every 666 days.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
like,
Well, Emily, if you ever need someone to fill in your shoes, when you go on holidays, let me know. I'm sure people would love MW to be running the sisters and everything. So.
oh my god, that would be such a great April Fool's prank. Fuck. Okay.
All right.
So this isn't going to happen anymore because we did some internal reorganization, and right, so John and I are basically tight in terms of packed releases, and we have deprioritized Lars, for example, and we're doing releases without Lars now. For instance, the last release went out without Lars, that kind of thing. So we're doing this kind of load balancing and sort of chaos testing on individual members of the team, and making sure that this doesn't happen again, because I think we recognize internally that this is a problem, and we're all subject to it. So we're working healthier. We've got a good release cycle now. We've got lots of process, and I think we're cranking out better quality work now. At least I hope you guys are stoked on the work that we put out. I would like feedback on the local API endpoint this release, if you want to tell me how you think it works. But yeah, we're doing better. We're doing a lot better.
Love to hear it, honestly. I love to hear that you guys are, from my point of view, being completely honest and open, it has felt a lot like you guys were a whole bunch of chickens with their heads cut off, running around just doing whatever seemed to pop up and seemed the most important at the given point in time. And if you're able to take that step back and not do that, right? And be clear and intentional about the things that you're working on and the tools that you would like to provide and build. Those are the needle moving actions. That is what will cause you to rise and not be forgotten by working on those actionable, needle moving, valuable tools that your community needs. That was the challenge that I gave last week, and the challenge remains, honestly. And it sounds like you guys are rising to meet that, and I really appreciate that. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Yeah, cheers. Well, I hope you guys get stoked for the speaker series that's coming up. We're going to do voice AMAs in Discord. I'm going to get Stuart in there once a week, and then it's going to be Doug once a month, and or Stuart in there once a month, Doug or Will once a month, and the rest, I think, me and Randy are gonna handle. So if you guys have more consistent feedback and you want to get more granular
Sterling
feedback,
and I co-host these.
I big doubt, but but you can always ask. Actually, I think Sterling might get away with it. I don't think MW is going to go through.
Sorry, Michael.
It's okay. And Sterling, I will tell you, there are a lot of people in my Telegram channel asking for apparently a video of you taking your shirt off. I have no idea what that's in reference to, but yeah, it's weird.
Okay, all they have to do is go to my Twitter channel and look at the pinned tweet, and I mean, it's like, I guess it's partially off. Is that not enough for them?
I didn't even know that was there, so I was a little concerned why they were asking. Now it makes a little more sense.
Your tweets are protected, so I don't know how to get in there.
Oh, mine are?
Oh, MW. Sorry.
Oh.
No, Sterling apparently had, I guess someone was asking him to take his shirt off, but apparently he already has it off, so I guess it was they were trying to prank me. People are always trying to troll me these days.
No,
Wait, where is it?
Yeah, I mean, I released an ad for my PACT course, where I recorded myself coming out of like the ocean on the beach.
Oh yeah, I remember
And
seeing
so
that.
like I have my shirt on, but I mean, it doesn't leave that much to the imagination. I'll be honest.
I just saw the view count on that tweet go up by about 300, so that's good.
Everyone who's listening, just thirst posting is what Sterling does best.
I don't know if it's what I do best. This is my first. This is my first thirst post, I guess. I had a lot of fun making it, and a lot of fun. I still laugh every time I see it. I've got it up on the left on my screen on the left. I'm gonna hide it now. It makes me. I enjoy recording little videos like that. But awesome conversation. Thank you so much, Emily. Thanks so much, Michael, and Stuck in the Future. Everyone who spoke, including the guy who was going into the satanic stuff. Thank you for putting us on the right track on a release schedule.
When you don't get a holiday and you don't have good work-life balance, you start you get to that level. So I think that's a good reason why you need to have good work-life balance.
That was hands down the most entertaining thing that's happened to me in a Twitter space so far. So thank you.
I hope that he has truly affected your release schedule, so you now actually do it every 3.5 months.
No. We'll do it every 3 months, but I'll have a note in like backwards Latin for him in every change log.
There you go. Love it. Awesome. Thank you so much, guys, for hopping in. This has been a great Twitter space. We'll be back next Friday, 1 p.m. Mountain Time.
Cheers.
Awesome. Thanks, Sterling.
Yeah.
All right.
Have a wonderful Friday, guys. Great weekend. Take some breaks. All right. See ya.